Welcome, friends. Tonight, you found your way here for a reason. Perhaps your mind has been racing. Perhaps worry has become your unwelcome companion. Perhaps you're simply searching for a deeper peace that the busy world cannot provide. Whatever brought you to this moment, know that you are exactly where you need to be. Before we begin this journey together, feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. These simple details remind us that across continents and time zones, countless souls are seeking the same fundamental truth, that peace is not something we must create, but something we must remember. Tonight, we will walk together through the timeless gardens of Buddhist wisdom, not as tourists rushing through, checking items off a list, but as travelers who understand that the journey itself holds the teaching. You won't need to memorize anything. You won't need to try hard or concentrate intensely. In fact, the trying itself is often what stands between us and the peace we seek. The ancient masters understood something profound, that the human mind, when left to its own devices, creates enormous suffering through resistance. We resist what is. We fight against the present moment. We demand that reality conform to our preferences, and when it doesn't, we suffer. Tonight, through gentle stories and quiet teachings, we will discover a different way. A way of meeting life that transforms struggle into flow, anxiety into acceptance, and restlessness into the deepest rest you've ever known. Let your body settle now into whatever surface supports it. You don't need to force relaxation. Simply notice where tension lives in your shoulders, your jaw, your hands, and with each exhale, imagine that tension melting like snow in sunlight. Your breath knows exactly what to do. It has been breathing you since the moment you were born. Trust it now. In a remote monastery, hidden among mountains that touch the sky, there lived a young monk named Tenzin, who carried a burden that no one else could see. Each morning, he would rise with the others before dawn, sit in meditation as instructed, chant the ancient sutras, and perform his daily tasks. To his fellow monks, he appeared disciplined and devoted, but inside, Tenzin was at war with himself. His mind, rather than settling into the peace he had come to the monastery seeking, seemed to grow more chaotic with each passing week. During meditation, thoughts would arrive like uninvited guests at a feast. Memories of his life before the monastery, worries about whether he was progressing on the spiritual path, judgments about whether his meditation was good enough, fantasies about the future, regrets about the past. The harder he tried to empty his mind, the more crowded it became. Tenzin had read the sacred texts. He understood intellectually that the goal was to achieve a state of empty awareness, a mind like a still pond reflecting the moon. But his mind felt more like a stormy ocean, and the gap between what the teachings described and what he actually experienced grew wider each day. This gap filled him with shame. Surely, he thought, the other monks had quieter minds. Surely his struggle meant he was failing at the most basic requirement of spiritual practice. One evening, after a particularly frustrating meditation session where he had spent the entire hour fighting with his thoughts, Tenzin approached his teacher. The old master, whose name was Hakuin, sat beneath a cherry tree in the monastery garden, watching the last light of day paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Master," Tenzin said, bowing deeply, "I must confess something that brings me great shame. I have been here for 6 months, and my mind is no quieter than when I arrived. During meditation, I am besieged by thoughts. I cannot achieve the empty awareness the texts describe. I fear I am wasting your time and my own." Hakuin looked at his young student with eyes that held no judgment, only gentle curiosity. "Tell me," he said, "what do you do when these thoughts arrive during meditation?" "I try to push them away," Tenzin replied. "I remind myself to focus on my breath. I tell myself that I should not be thinking, but the thoughts keep coming, perhaps even more forcefully than before. It's exhausting." The master nodded slowly. "Come with me," he said, rising from his seat beneath the tree. They walked together through the monastery grounds, past the meditation hall, past the living quarters, until they reached a small stream that ran along the property's edge. The water moved steadily over smooth stones, creating a gentle music that filled the evening air. Hakuin gestured toward the stream. "Tell me, what do you see?" Tenzin looked at the flowing water. "I see a stream, master. Water moving over rocks. And is the water trying to move?" Tenzin paused, considering the question more carefully. "No, I suppose it is not trying. It simply flows according to its nature." "Exactly. And when a leaf falls into this stream, does the water say, 'No, you should not be here. I must push you away so I can be pure water again?'" Despite his troubled state, Tenzin smiled at the image. "No, master. The water simply carries the leaf along with it until the leaf naturally moves on." Hakuin picked up a small stone from the stream's edge and tossed it into the water. "Watch carefully," he said. "When the stone enters the water, what happens?" "It creates ripples," Tenzin observed, "circles spreading outward from where it landed. And does the water resist these ripples? Does it fight against them or try to prevent them from occurring?" "No, the ripples simply happen as part of the water's natural response to the stone." The old master sat down on a large rock beside the stream and invited Tenzin to sit beside him. "Your mind," he said softly, "is like this water. Thoughts are like leaves falling into the stream or stones tossed in. They will come. This is the nature of mind. The problem is not that thoughts arise. The problem is that you are trying to be a stream that prevents leaves and stones from entering, which is as impossible as it is exhausting." Tenzin felt something shift in his chest, a small loosening of a knot he hadn't fully realized was there. "But master, the teachings speak of empty awareness, of mind like clear sky. How can I achieve this if thoughts constantly arise?" Hakuin gestured toward the darkening sky above them, where stars were beginning to appear. "Look up," he said. "What do you see?" "Stars," Tenzin replied. "And the vast space between them?" "Exactly. The sky is vast and empty, yet clouds pass through it, birds fly through it, wind moves through it. Does this activity diminish the sky's essential spaciousness?" "No," Tenzin said slowly, beginning to understand. "The sky remains vast, regardless of what passes through it. Your awareness is like this sky. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, all pass through it like clouds and birds. But the awareness itself, the consciousness that notices these thoughts, is never disturbed by them. You have been so focused on the clouds that you forgot about the sky holding them." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the stream and watching the stars emerge fully in the night sky. Finally, Tenzin spoke again. "So, I should not try to stop thoughts from arising?" "That's correct. Trying to stop thoughts is like trying to stop this stream from flowing. It is fighting against nature itself. Instead, practice noticing thoughts the way you notice clouds. Oh, there is a thought about the past. Oh, there is a worry about tomorrow. Oh, there is a judgment about my meditation. See them clearly, but don't give them more importance than a leaf floating in a stream." "But how do I know if I'm progressing if my mind is always thinking?" "Progress," Hakuin said with a gentle smile, "is not measured by the absence of thoughts. It is measured by your changing relationship with those thoughts. When you first arrived, you believed your thoughts. You identified with them completely. If a worried thought arose, you became a worried person. If a judgmental thought appeared, you became a judgmental person. Now, you are learning to see thoughts as events in awareness rather than definitions of who you are. This is profound progress, even if it doesn't feel dramatic." From that evening forward, Tenzin's meditation practice transformed completely. He stopped trying to achieve an empty mind and instead practiced being the spacious awareness that could hold any content without being disturbed by it. When thoughts arose, he would silently acknowledge them. Thinking about the past, or worried about the future, or judging this meditation, and then gently return his attention to the present moment without any sense of failure or struggle. The paradox was striking. The moment he stopped fighting his thoughts, they began to settle naturally. Not always, not completely, but enough that he tasted the peace he had been seeking so desperately. He discovered that the peace was not found by eliminating all mental activity, but by recognizing the unchanging awareness within which all mental activity arose and dissolved. Months later, when new monks would arrive and confess their own struggles with busy minds, Tenzin would share the teaching of the stream. "Your mind will think," he would tell them. "This is not a problem. The problem exists only when you believe you should not be thinking, when you go to war with your own natural mental processes. Practice being the sky rather than the clouds, the stream rather than the leaves, and you will discover that peace was never dependent on perfect silence. It was always present in the awareness that notices everything without being disturbed by anything." This story holds a key that unlocks so much unnecessary suffering. Most people come to meditation or spiritual practice believing that the goal is to stop thinking. They imagine that enlightened beings have somehow shut off their minds, existing in perpetual blank awareness. But this is a profound misunderstanding. The human brain produces thoughts the way the heart produces beats. It is what brains do. Fighting this natural process is like asking your heart to stop beating while you're still alive. What actually transforms is not the presence or absence of thoughts, but your relationship with them. When you identify completely with your mental content, believing that every thought is true and important and demands your response, you live in a state of constant reactivity. Your peace depends on having only pleasant thoughts, which is impossible. But when you begin to recognize thoughts as events in awareness, temporary visitors rather than permanent residents, you discover a stability that external circumstances cannot shake. The teaching of the stream points towards something even more profound than just managing thoughts. It reveals the fundamental misunderstanding that creates most human suffering. The belief that we must control our inner experience in order to be okay. We extend enormous energy trying to have only certain thoughts, only certain emotions, only certain sensations. We treat our inner life like a garden that must be weeded constantly, vigilantly removing anything we've decided shouldn't be there. But what if this very effort is the problem? What if the exhaustion you feel is not from life's challenges themselves, but from the constant battle you wage against your own natural responses to those challenges? The Buddhist understanding of acceptance begins here, with this radical permission to let your inner experience be exactly what it is in any given moment. This doesn't mean you like everything that arises. Tenzin didn't enjoy his worried thoughts or his self-judgments. The teaching is not about cultivating positive feelings toward negative experiences. It's about recognizing that resistance to what's already present adds a layer of suffering that's entirely optional. When a worried thought arises and you simply notice it, you have one experience: the worried thought. When a worried thought arises and you resist it, judge yourself for having it, and struggle to make it go away, you now have multiple experiences. The original worried thought, plus frustration, plus self-judgment, plus the exhaustion of struggle. The resistance creates more suffering than the original worry. Let your breathing find its own rhythm now. Notice how your body breathes without any instruction from you. The inhale comes when it's ready. The exhale follows naturally. There's a wisdom in this autonomy, a trust in processes that function perfectly well without micromanagement. Your mind has a similar wisdom, if you can learn to stop interfering with it. In the same monastery where Tenzin lived, there was a small garden that no one tended. While other areas of the monastery grounds were carefully maintained, with precisely raked gravel and thoughtfully pruned trees, this particular corner had been left to its own devices for many years. Wild grasses grew there. Flowers seeded themselves randomly. Vines climbed without direction. To some of the monks, this untended garden seemed like neglect, a failure of proper monastery stewardship. But the abbot, a man of great age and greater wisdom, had intentionally preserved this wild space. He called it the teaching garden, though he rarely explained why. Visitors would sometimes ask why this one area was allowed to grow chaotically while everything else was so carefully controlled. His answer was always the same: watch the garden through the seasons, and it will show you something important. A senior monk named Keiko had been watching the teaching garden for 3 years. She had noticed that in spring, certain flowers appeared without being planted. In summer, the grasses grew tall and provided shade for smaller plants beneath them. In autumn, leaves fell and created natural mulch. In winter, the dried stalks and seed heads provided food and shelter for birds. The garden had developed its own ecosystem, its own balance, its own beauty that was completely different from the manicured spaces but no less striking. One day, as Keiko sat near the teaching garden during her afternoon meditation break, the abbot came and sat beside her. "Tell me," he said, "what has the garden taught you?" Keiko considered her answer carefully. "I have learned that life organizes itself when left alone, that control is not always necessary, that there can be beauty in wildness as well as in cultivation." The abbot nodded. "Good. And what else?" "I have noticed that nothing in this garden struggles to be what it is. The grass doesn't try to become a flower. The vine doesn't resist its nature to climb. Everything simply expresses what it is meant to express, and somehow this creates a functioning whole." "Excellent. And now tell me, how does this teaching apply to your own mind?" Keiko was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I spend much of my meditation time trying to cultivate certain states and eliminate others. I want my mind to be like the raked gravel garden, perfectly smooth, with every element in its proper place. But perhaps my mind is more like this wild garden. Perhaps it has its own wisdom that emerges when I stop trying to control everything." The abbot smiled broadly. "For 3 years, you have been watching plants. Today, you have seen yourself. The teaching garden exists not to show you how plants grow, but to show you how awareness naturally organizes when you stop interfering with it. Just as this garden becomes more alive and resilient without constant human control, your mind becomes more peaceful and clear when you stop trying to force it into predetermined shapes." "But Master," Keiko asked, "doesn't spiritual practice require discipline and effort? Aren't we supposed to train the mind?" "There is a difference," the abbot explained, "between training and tyranny. Training respects natural capacity and works with it. Tyranny fights against nature and tries to force it into unnatural forms. When you practice meditation with curiosity and gentleness, you are training. When you practice meditation with harsh self-criticism and rigid demands, you are practicing tyranny against yourself." He gestured toward the wild garden. "Notice that I didn't completely abandon this space. It is still within the monastery walls. It still receives rain and sun. It exists within a container. But within that container, I trust the natural intelligence of living systems to organize themselves. Your meditation practice provides the container, the regular schedule, the quiet space, the intention to be present. But within that container, you must learn to trust the natural intelligence of awareness to organize itself. When you do this, something more beautiful and authentic emerges than any amount of forcing could create." The teaching garden became a frequent destination for Keiko after that conversation. She would sit beside it, not trying to understand it intellectually, but allowing it to teach her through observation and feeling. She began to notice how her own mind, when she stopped demanding that it be different, began to reveal its own natural clarity. Thoughts still arose, but they moved through awareness like insects moving through the garden, each one part of the ecosystem, each one exactly where it needed to be. One afternoon, as she sat in her usual spot, a sudden understanding arose with complete clarity. She'd been treating her mind like a problem to be solved, when in fact it was already perfect in its functioning. The arising and passing of thoughts, emotions, and sensations was not a malfunction requiring correction. It was the natural expression of conscious experience, as perfect in its way as the wild garden's seasonal cycles. This realization brought such relief that tears came to her eyes. For decades, she had been fighting a war against her own nature, believing that peace required winning this war. Now she understood that peace came from ending the war itself, from recognizing that there was never actually an enemy to defeat. Her mind had always been doing exactly what minds do, and there was nothing wrong with this. When the abbot saw her tears, he simply nodded. "The garden has given you its deepest teaching," he said. "Welcome home." The parallel between the wild garden and human consciousness reveals something that Western psychology is only beginning to understand: that many mental health problems are not caused by the mind's natural processes, but by our resistance to those processes. When you fight against anxiety, the anxiety often intensifies. When you harshly judge your depression, the depression deepens. When you try to forcibly suppress intrusive thoughts, they return with greater intensity. This is because consciousness, like an ecosystem, has its own self-regulating intelligence. Emotions arise to provide information and move us toward action. Thoughts emerge to help us process, experience, and plan for the future. Sensations alert us to the body's needs and conditions. These processes become problems only when we add layers of resistance, judgment, and control that interfere with their natural flow. The teaching of the wild garden invites a different approach. Create the right conditions, then trust the natural intelligence of your system. In meditation, this means sitting regularly, bringing gentle attention to present experience, and then allowing awareness to do what it does naturally. In daily life, it means noticing when you're trying to force your inner experience into certain shapes and practicing a lighter touch. Feel into this possibility now. What would it be like to let your mind be exactly as it is in this moment? Not forever, not in every situation. Just right now, as you rest here, what if you gave yourself complete permission to think whatever thoughts arise, feel whatever emotions are present, have whatever sensations exist? Not because these are all pleasant or comfortable, but because they're already here, and fighting them changes nothing except to add struggle to whatever is already challenging. Your body knows how to do this. When you cut your finger, you don't have to instruct your body on how to heal. The healing process unfolds naturally if you simply keep the wound clean and give it time. Your psyche has similar healing wisdom. When you experience something difficult, your consciousness will naturally process and integrate that experience, if you give it space rather than constantly interrupting with demands that it be different. In a village at the base of the mountains, there lived a woman named Yuki, who had experienced a terrible loss. Her husband, to whom she had been married for 25 years, had died suddenly of a heart condition that no one knew he had. One morning, he simply didn't wake up. The shock was profound. The grief was overwhelming, and Yuki found herself lost in a landscape of pain she had never imagined existed. Well-meaning friends and family offered advice. "You must stay busy. You need to move on. He wouldn't want you to be sad. Time heals all wounds." But none of these phrases touched the actual experience of her grief. If anything, they made her feel more alone, as if she was supposed to be feeling something other than what she actually felt. 6 months after her husband's death, Yuki heard about a Buddhist teacher who was visiting a nearby town. She decided to attend one of his public talks, hoping perhaps for some wisdom that might ease her suffering. The talk was about acceptance and letting go. At one point, the teacher invited questions from the audience. Yuki raised her hand, and when called upon, spoke through tears. "Teacher, my husband died 6 months ago. Everyone tells me I should be moving on, but the pain is still so intense. I feel like I'm failing at grief. How do I let go and accept what happened?" The teacher looked at her with such compassion that Yuki felt seen for the first time since her husband's death. He was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly, so the entire room had to lean in to hear. "Tell me," he said, "when you say you should be moving on, Who decided this timeline? Who determined that 6 months is too long to grieve a 25-year marriage? Yuki thought about this. I suppose everyone around me seems to think I should be better by now. The teacher nodded. And when you say you're failing at grief, what would succeeding at grief look like? This question caught Yuki off guard. She had never considered it from this angle. I suppose not feeling so much pain? Being able to think about him without crying? The teacher rose from his seat and walked closer to where Yuki sat in the audience. Let me tell you something about grief that most people misunderstand, he said. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It is love that has nowhere to go. You spent 25 years expressing love to your husband through actions, words, presence. That love was active, flowing, purposeful. Now he is gone, and that river of love continues to flow. But the person who received it is no longer here. The pain you feel is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of profound love. Tears streamed down Yuki's face. Others in the audience were crying too, recognizing their own experiences of loss in her story. What you call moving on is actually a misunderstanding of what grief asks of us, the teacher continued. Grief doesn't ask us to forget or to stop loving. It asks us to learn to carry our love in a different way, to let it transform from active expression to tender memory. This transformation doesn't happen on anyone else's schedule. It unfolds in its own time, like a flower blooming. You cannot force a flower to open faster by pulling on its petals. You can only provide the right conditions and trust the natural process. But how do I provide the right conditions? Yuki asked. How do I stop feeling like I'm doing this wrong? By stopping the war against your grief. Right now, you are experiencing two pains, the natural pain of loss and the additional pain of believing you shouldn't be experiencing the first pain. The second pain is optional. When you notice yourself thinking, I should be over this by now, or I'm failing at grief, recognize that these are thoughts that add suffering to your suffering. They are not truth. They are not helping. They are simply mental habits that can be released. The teacher suggested a practice. Every time grief arises, instead of judging it or trying to make it go away, speak to it as you would speak to a beloved child who is hurting. You might say, I know, this hurts so much. It's okay to hurt. I'm here with you. This doesn't make the grief disappear, but it stops the additional suffering that comes from rejecting your own natural response to loss. Over the following months, Yuki practiced this new relationship with her grief. When waves of sadness would overwhelm her, instead of thinking she should be stronger or more healed by now, she would acknowledge the pain with tenderness. Yes, you miss him terribly. Of course you do. 25 years of shared life doesn't dissolve in 6 months or 6 years. Something remarkable happened. The grief didn't disappear, but it began to change shape. Some days it was sharp and fresh. Other days it was a dull ache in the background. And increasingly, there were moments when memories of her husband brought smiles rather than only tears. She could think about their life together and feel grateful for what they had shared rather than only devastated by its ending. What she discovered was that accepting her grief didn't mean resigning herself to permanent suffering. It meant making room for the natural healing process to unfold without constantly interrupting it with judgment and demands. The grief was teaching her things about the depth of her capacity to love, about what truly mattered in life, about resilience she didn't know she possessed. A year after her husband's death, Yuki returned to hear the same teacher speak when he visited again. After his talk, she approached him during the informal gathering. I want to thank you, she said. Your teaching about grief changed everything for me. Tell me what changed, the teacher said. I stopped trying to get over my grief and started learning to be with it. And in doing that, the grief itself began to transform. It's still here, but it doesn't control my life the way it did. I've learned to carry it alongside other feelings, joy, peace, interest in life. They all coexist now. The teacher smiled. You have learned one of Buddhism's deepest teachings, that suffering comes not from pain itself, but from our relationship with pain. You cannot choose whether grief arises when you lose someone you love, but you can choose whether to add the suffering of resistance to the pain of loss. You have chosen wisdom, and it has set you free even while you continue to grieve. Yuki's story illustrates something essential about the Buddhist understanding of acceptance. In Western culture, acceptance is often confused with resignation or defeat. We think it means giving up, becoming passive, or pretending we don't care. But in Buddhist practice, acceptance is actually a form of profound courage. It is the willingness to turn toward our experience rather than away from it, to meet what is difficult with an open heart rather than a closed fist. The teaching that grief is love with nowhere to go illuminates why resistance to grief is so painful. When we tell ourselves we shouldn't be feeling what we're feeling, we're essentially saying that our love was wrong or shouldn't have been so deep. We're arguing with one of the most beautiful aspects of human experience, our capacity for profound connection and care. Accepting grief is accepting love. Accepting loss is accepting that we dared to love something mortal and precious. This principle extends far beyond grief. Any emotion you're experiencing, no matter how uncomfortable, exists for a reason. Anger often arises to protect boundaries or signal injustice. Anxiety tries to keep you safe by alerting you to potential threats. Sadness invites you to slow down and process loss. These emotional responses become problems not because they exist, but because we fight against them, believing we shouldn't feel what we feel. Let yourself notice right now what emotions might be present in your body. Don't try to change them or understand them. Simply notice, is there tension anywhere? A sense of heaviness or lightness? Any lingering worry or peace? Whatever is here, can you make room for it without needing it to be different? This is the practice. Not forcing positive feelings, but allowing whatever is true to be acknowledged with kindness. In a forest monastery where monks lived in individual huts spread throughout the wooded hillside, there was a practice that new arrivals found strange and somewhat unsettling. Once each month, the entire community would gather for what they called the full moon confession. Under the light of the full moon, monks would share openly about their struggles, failures, and difficulties on the spiritual path. A young monk named Daichi had recently joined this community. He came from a tradition where strength meant never showing weakness, where spiritual practitioners were expected to project confidence and accomplishment. The idea of publicly confessing his struggles felt humiliating and counterproductive. Wouldn't admitting his failures just reinforce them? Wouldn't vulnerability be mistaken for incompetence? The first full moon confession he attended confirmed his fears. One after another, monks stood and shared honestly about their difficulties. One spoke about his continuing struggle with pride. Another admitted that after 10 years of practice, he still battled with anger regularly. An elderly monk, respected by everyone, confessed that doubt about the teaching still arose in his mind frequently. Daichi was shocked. These were supposed to be accomplished practitioners. Why were they advertising their failures? When his turn came to speak, he said simply, "I am new here and still learning." He sat down quickly, revealing nothing. After the gathering, an older monk named Jiro approached him. "I noticed you kept your sharing very brief tonight," he said kindly. "This practice may seem strange to you." Daichi nodded. "In my previous monastery, we didn't speak about our struggles so openly. Isn't there a risk of reinforcing negative patterns by giving them so much attention?" Jiro smiled. "Walk with me," he suggested. They strolled along a moonlit path through the forest. "Tell me," Jiro said, "have you ever had a wound that you tried to hide? Perhaps as a child?" "Yes," Daichi recalled. "Once I cut my leg badly but didn't want my parents to know, because I had been doing something I wasn't supposed to do. I kept it hidden and cleaned it secretly. And what happened to that wound?" "It got infected," Daichi admitted. Eventually it became so bad I had to show my parents, and it took much longer to heal than if I had sought help immediately. Exactly. Hidden wounds fester, acknowledged wounds heal. This is true for physical injuries and emotional injuries alike. When we pretend we don't struggle, when we hide our difficulties and present a false image of having it all together, we create the perfect conditions for those difficulties to grow stronger in the darkness of secrecy. But doesn't speaking about our problems just reinforce them? Jiro paused beneath a large tree, its branches casting intricate shadows in the moonlight. There is a profound difference between ruminating on problems and acknowledging them clearly. Rumination is when you circle the same worry again and again, lost in story and reaction. Acknowledgement is when you simply name what is true. I am experiencing anger. I notice pride arising. I feel doubt. This kind of honest naming actually weakens the grip these patterns have on us. He continued, when you try to hide your struggles, you expend enormous energy maintaining the false image. Energy that could be used for actual healing and growth gets diverted into pretending. More importantly, isolation is one of the primary ways difficult patterns maintain their power. When you believe you're the only one struggling with pride or anger or doubt, shame takes root. Shame tells you that your struggles mean something is fundamentally wrong with you. But when you hear others honestly sharing similar difficulties, you realize these are simply part of the human experience. Over the following months, Daichi began to participate more honestly in the full moon confessions. The first time he admitted that he frequently felt inadequate in his practice, that he compared himself to other monks and found himself wanting. Something unexpected happened. Several senior monks approached him afterward to share that they had struggled with the exact same pattern. One monk, whom Daichi had considered almost perfect in his practice, confessed that comparison had plagued him for 20 years before he finally learned to work with it skillfully. This revelation was transformative for Daichi. The struggles he had believed marked him as deficient were actually common experiences on the spiritual path. The senior monks weren't more advanced because they had eliminated these difficulties. They were more advanced because they had learned to acknowledge them without shame and work with them with wisdom. As the months passed, Daichi noticed something else. The act of confessing his struggles in the supportive environment of the full moon gathering actually did diminish their power. When he spoke about his pride, really naming it clearly in front of others, the pride seemed to lose some of its grip. It was as if bringing it into the light of awareness and community somehow weakened its hold on his behavior. Jiro explained this phenomenon one day. Difficult patterns thrive in secrecy and shame. They whisper to you that you must hide them, that others wouldn't understand, that revelation would mean disaster. But these whispers are lies designed to protect the pattern itself. When you courageously bring your struggles into the light of honest acknowledgement, you break the pattern's primary defense mechanism. You remove the shame that was actually feeding it more than the pattern itself. Daichi also discovered that sharing his struggles made him a better friend to other monks. When someone else confessed difficulty with anger, Daichi could now meet them with genuine understanding rather than judgment, because he had learned to meet his own anger without judgment. The vulnerability he had feared would make him weak actually made him more compassionate and connected. One evening, a year after his arrival, Daichi stood during the full moon confession and spoke with complete honesty. This month, I have struggled greatly with doubt. Questions arise in meditation. Am I wasting my time here? Are these teachings true? Will I ever understand? I have also noticed harsh self-judgment. When my mind wanders during meditation, I speak to myself with cruelty I would never direct at another person. And I continue to battle with restlessness, constantly wanting to be somewhere other than where I am, doing something other than what I'm doing. As he spoke these truths, Daichi felt both vulnerable and strangely liberated. The shame that used to accompany these admissions had dissolved. He was simply describing his current experience, the way one might describe the weather. After the gathering, the abbot, who rarely spoke during these confessions, approached him. A year ago, You shared almost nothing at these gatherings. Tonight you shared your truth fully. Do you know what has changed? Daichi considered. I trust now that my struggles don't make me deficient. I understand that hiding them actually gave them more power, and I've learned that this community won't reject me for being honest about my experience. The abbot nodded. You have learned what we call the practice of radical honesty with oneself. This is one of the most powerful practices on the spiritual path. Not honesty as in confessing to others constantly, though that has its place, but honesty as in refusing to lie to yourself about your actual experience. When you can look directly at what is true in your mind and heart without flinching away or coating it in justifications and stories, transformation becomes possible. The practice of the full moon confession teaches us something profound about the relationship between acceptance and change. Many people fear that accepting their difficulties means they'll never change. They believe they must maintain constant pressure on themselves, constant self-criticism and shame, or they'll simply give up and succumb to their worst patterns. But the opposite is true. Change becomes possible only when we first accept what is actually true right now. If you can't acknowledge clearly that you're experiencing anger, you can't learn to work with anger skillfully. If you must pretend you never doubt, you can't investigate doubt and discover what it's trying to show you. If you hide your grief behind a facade of being fine, you prevent the natural healing process that grief requires. This is why Buddhist practice places such emphasis on clear seeing. Not judgment, not analysis, not strategizing about how to fix yourself, but simple, honest acknowledgement of present experience. Yes, anger is here right now. Yes, doubt has arisen. Yes, sadness is moving through me. This kind of clear seeing creates the foundation for wise response. But it can only happen when you stop adding the layer of "this shouldn't be happening" on top of what is already happening. Feel into your own experience now. What are you telling yourself about how you should be feeling right now? Should you be more relaxed? Should your mind be quieter? Should you already be asleep? Notice these shoulds for what they are. Arguments with reality as it actually is in this moment. What happens when you drop the shoulds and simply acknowledge what is true? I'm feeling somewhat awake. Some tension remains in my body. Thoughts are still moving through my mind. These are just facts, requiring no judgment, demanding no immediate solution. In a coastal village where morning mists rolled in from the sea each dawn, there lived an elderly fisherman named Taro. He had spent 60 years fishing these waters, understanding their moods and patterns through decades of patient observation. The young fishermen in the village respected his knowledge, but they also found him puzzling. Unlike them, Taro never seemed frustrated when the fish weren't biting. He never complained about bad weather or difficult conditions. He simply went out each day, did his work, and returned home seemingly at peace regardless of the results. One day, a young fisherman named Kenzo worked alongside Taro. It was a difficult day. The wind was strong, the waves choppy, and after hours of effort, both men had caught very little. Kenzo felt his frustration building with each empty net. Finally, he turned to Taro. "Old uncle, how do you stay so calm when the fishing is this bad? Don't you feel angry at wasting a whole day?" Taro continued checking his nets with the same steady attention he brought to all his work. "Tell me, young Kenzo, when you go out fishing, what is your expectation?" Kenzo thought this was obvious. To catch fish, of course. What else would I expect? And when you don't catch fish, you suffer because your expectation is not met? Exactly. It feels like the whole day is wasted. Taro nodded thoughtfully. For many years, I felt the same way. I would wake up expecting good fishing, and when I didn't get it, I would be angry. Angry at the sea, angry at the fish, angry at the weather. This anger made difficult days even more difficult. Then one year, something changed. What changed? There was a terrible storm season. For 3 months, conditions were so bad that we could barely fish at all. My family's food stores ran low. I was afraid we wouldn't make it through. Day after day, I would go to the shore and look at the violent sea, feeling rage and helplessness. That sounds awful, Kenzo said. It was. But one morning, as I stood on the beach watching the storm, an old woman came and stood beside me. She was a widow, too old to fish herself, who survived on what others shared with her. I expected her to be as angry as I was about the storms preventing fishing, but instead, she was smiling. I asked her how she could smile when we were all facing starvation. What did she say? She said, "The sea is being itself. It does not have storms to punish us. It simply follows its nature. When I argue with the sea for being the sea, I create two problems. The first problem is that we cannot fish. The second problem is my anger about not being able to fish. The first problem I cannot control. The second problem I create myself." Taro paused in his work to look directly at Kenzo. Those words changed my entire relationship with fishing. I realized I had been living as if the sea owed me fish, as if good conditions were my right and difficult conditions were an injustice. But the sea owes me nothing. The fish owe me nothing. Some days provide abundance, some days provide little. Both are simply the sea being the sea. But how does accepting bad fishing help you? Kenzo asked, genuinely confused. Don't you still go home with an empty boat? Yes, Taro replied. But I go home with an empty boat and a peaceful mind instead of an empty boat and a tormented mind. The emptiness of the boat is the same either way. The state of my mind is entirely different. And here is what I discovered. When my mind is peaceful, I make better decisions. I notice subtle signs I miss when I'm angry. I have energy to try different approaches. My acceptance of difficult conditions actually makes me a more effective fisherman, not a less effective one. He continued checking his nets as he spoke. Today has been difficult. This is true. But I have been on the sea, breathing fresh air, watching the birds, feeling the boat move beneath me. I have practiced patience. I have learned again how to be present with what is, rather than lost in what I wish would be. These are not small things. A day that teaches me presence is not a wasted day, regardless of how many fish I catch. Kenzo was quiet for a long time, processing this perspective. Finally, he asked, "But don't you ever feel disappointed?" "Of course," Taro said with a gentle laugh. "I'm human. Disappointment arises naturally when I hoped for one outcome and received another. But disappointment is just a feeling. It comes, it visits, it passes. I don't need to create a whole story around it. I don't need to make it mean something about my worth as a fisherman or about whether the universe is fair. It's just disappointment, moving through like weather." That afternoon, as they returned to shore with their meager catch, Kenzo tried to practice what Taro had described. When frustration arose about the poor results, he noticed it. Frustration is here. He didn't try to make it go away or judge himself for feeling it. He just acknowledged it and continued his work. To his surprise, the frustration didn't intensify the way it usually did. It was there, but it didn't consume him. Over the following months, Kenzo returned to fish with Taro whenever possible. He was learning more than fishing techniques. He was learning a different way of meeting life. He began to notice that his resistance to difficult conditions had been like trying to fish with a net full of holes. So much energy drained through the holes of his resistance that little remained for the actual work of fishing. One day, after a particularly good catch, Kenzo said to Taro, "I used to think acceptance meant giving up or not caring. But I'm beginning to understand it's actually the opposite. It's caring so much that you don't waste your energy fighting things you can't control. You save all your energy for responding skillfully to what's actually in front of you." Taro nodded with satisfaction. Now you are learning what the sea teaches. The sea does not ask for our acceptance. It simply is what it is. We can spend our lives arguing with its nature, or we can learn to work with it. One approach leads to exhaustion and suffering. The other leads to skill and peace. Years later, when Kenzo had become an accomplished fisherman himself, younger men would ask him why he never seemed frustrated by difficult conditions. He would tell them about Taro and the teaching of the sea. "The ocean will give you what it gives you," he would explain. "Your job is not to control the ocean. Your job is to show up, do your best work, and accept the results without making them mean more than they mean. This is the path to both better fishing and a better life." The story of the fisherman illuminates a crucial distinction that many people miss when they first encounter Buddhist teachings about acceptance. They imagine that acceptance means becoming passive, uncaring, or resigned to poor outcomes. But the fisherman's wisdom shows that acceptance is actually what makes skillful action possible. When you're not wasting energy fighting against conditions you cannot control, all that energy becomes available for responding intelligently to what you can influence. This principle appears everywhere once you begin to notice it. Athletes perform better when they accept rather than fight against pressure. Students learn more effectively when they acknowledge rather than resist their confusion. Parents respond more skillfully to their children's difficult behavior when they accept rather than struggle against their own frustration. The pattern is always the same. Resistance to what is already present divides your attention and drains your energy, while acceptance allows you to focus completely on responding wisely. The fisherman's teaching about disappointment is particularly valuable. He doesn't claim that he never feels disappointment. He acknowledges it naturally arises when expectations aren't met. But he doesn't elaborate the disappointment into a story about injustice, personal failure, or cosmic unfairness. He lets it be what it is, a temporary emotional response to unmet expectations. It comes, it visits, it passes. This lightness of touch with difficult emotions is the fruit of acceptance practice. Notice in your own life where you might be creating two problems where only one exists. The first problem, something genuinely difficult or unpleasant. The second problem, your resistance to and story about the first problem. Perhaps you're dealing with physical pain. The first problem is the actual sensation in your body. The second problem is your mental narrative. Why is this happening to me? This isn't fair. I can't stand this. What if it never gets better? The second problem often creates more suffering than the first. The invitation is not to eliminate all preferences or stop caring about outcomes. The fisherman still preferred good fishing days to difficult ones. But he held that preference lightly. He didn't make difficult conditions mean something terrible about him or about life. He met them as natural variations in a system he participated in but didn't control. Let your breath find an even deeper rhythm now. Feel how acceptance is already built into your body's most basic function. Your lungs don't resist empty breath or cling to full breath. They participate in a natural cycle of receiving and releasing, fullness and emptiness, without making any of it a problem. This is the wisdom your body has always known. Your mind can learn it too. In a mountain monastery where silence was observed most of the day, the monks communicated through simple gestures and written notes when necessary. New arrivals found this practice difficult. Their minds, so accustomed to constant external stimulation and verbal interaction, would become extremely loud in the silence. Internal chatter intensified without the usual outlets of conversation and distraction. A young woman named Sachi arrived at this monastery after years of searching for peace through various spiritual practices. She had meditated, studied, attended retreats, and read countless books. But the fundamental restlessness she carried had never truly settled. She hoped that the intensive silence of this monastery might finally quiet her turbulent mind. The first week was torture. Without conversation to distract her, Sachi became painfully aware of the constant stream of thoughts flowing through her mind. Commentary about everything around her, judgments of herself and others, plans and worries and memories and fantasies. The noise was relentless. She began to doubt whether she could complete even the 3-month commitment she had made. After a particularly difficult meditation session, Sachi wrote a note to her teacher, an elderly nun named Mother Kenji. "My mind will not be quiet. The silence makes it worse. Am I doing something wrong?" Mother Kenji wrote back, "You are trying to make silence in your mind This creates more noise. Learn to be silent with the noise. Sachi didn't understand. How could she be silent if her mind was noisy? Wasn't the whole point of practice to eliminate the mental chatter? That evening, Mother Kenji invited Sachi to sit with her in the garden as the sun set. She pointed to a small waterfall that flowed into a pond. The water made a constant, gentle rushing sound. Then she gestured for Sachi to listen carefully. At first, Sachi heard only the waterfall, but as she listened more deeply, other sounds emerged. Birds calling to each other, wind moving through bamboo, insects singing in the grass. The garden was full of sound, yet somehow it was also deeply silent. The sounds didn't disturb the silence. They lived within it. Mother Kenji wrote in her notebook, "External silence is not absence of sound. It is not being disturbed by sound. Internal silence is the same." Over the following weeks, this teaching slowly revealed its depth to Sachi. She stopped trying to eliminate thoughts and instead practiced being the silence that held all thoughts. Like the garden that remained somehow silent despite many sounds, her awareness could remain still even as thoughts moved through it. She discovered that there was a quality of consciousness itself that was always silent, always still, regardless of what content appeared within it. This awareness didn't need thoughts to stop. It simply needed to be recognized as distinct from the thoughts it was aware of. The analogy that helped her most was the movie screen. When a movie plays, there's constant motion and sound and story on the screen, but the screen itself never moves. It remains perfectly still, simply allowing all the movement to appear on its surface. Her awareness was like the screen. Thoughts were like the movie. This shift in perspective was subtle but revolutionary. Instead of trying to stop thoughts, which had always led to more effort and more frustration, Sachi began to rest in the awareness that witnessed thoughts. When a thought arose, she would notice. There is a thought about tomorrow. There is a judgment about my meditation. There is a memory from childhood. The thoughts continued to come, but her relationship with them had fundamentally changed. She was no longer inside the thoughts, believing them completely and being tossed around by their content. She was the space in which thoughts appeared and dissolved, like clouds passing through a vast sky. Mother Kenji noticed the change in Sachi's presence. Where before there had been a quality of struggle and tension, now there was a growing settledness. One afternoon, she wrote a note asking Sachi what she had discovered. Sachi wrote back, "I have been trying to achieve silence by making my mind stop. But I've learned that silence is not something I create. It's what I am underneath all the mental noise. The noise continues, but I am no longer disturbed by it because I no longer believe I am the noise." Mother Kenji's response was simple. "Now you understand why we maintain silence here. Not to stop thoughts, but to help you discover what is already silent beneath them." As the weeks passed, Sachi's practice deepened in unexpected ways. She found that this recognition of inherent silence extended beyond formal meditation. While working in the monastery kitchen, preparing food in silence, she could feel the same quality of stillness holding all her actions. While walking the mountain paths during afternoon exercise time, the silence was present even as her mind made plans or remembered conversations or noticed details of the landscape. The silence, she realized, was not dependent on external conditions or internal states. It was the fundamental nature of awareness itself. And this awareness was always available, always present, always peaceful, regardless of what appeared within it. One morning, 3 months into her stay, Sachi experienced something that brought all these teachings together in a moment of crystal clarity. She was sitting in meditation, and as usual, thoughts were present. But suddenly, she recognized with total certainty that she was not the thoughts. She was the awareness in which thoughts appeared. This wasn't an intellectual understanding, it was direct, immediate recognition. The thoughts were like birds flying through the sky of awareness. The birds come and go, but the sky remains unchanged. In that moment, a profound peace settled over her. Not because her mind had become empty of thoughts, but because she had found the silent ground that was never disturbed by thoughts. It had been there all along, hidden not by the presence of thoughts, but by her identification with them. When the meditation bell rang, Sachi opened her eyes, feeling lighter than she had in years. She went to find Mother Kenji and wrote a note. "I understand now. The peace I was seeking was never missing. I was simply looking at the thoughts instead of recognizing what was looking at the thoughts." Mother Kenji smiled and wrote back, "This is why we say enlightenment is not about gaining something new, but recognizing what has always been present. You have always been this awareness. You simply forgot. Believing yourself to be the content appearing in awareness instead of awareness itself." Sachi stayed at the monastery for another year, not because she needed more teaching, but because living in that environment of silence made it easier to remember and rest in this recognition. But when she eventually returned to the noise and complexity of ordinary life, she carried this understanding with her. In the midst of busy streets and demanding responsibilities and constant conversation, she could still access the inner silence that was her true nature. This is what the teaching of silence points toward. Not the absence of sound or thought, but the recognition of that which is never disturbed by sound or thought. Your essential awareness, the consciousness that is reading these words right now, has never been disturbed by anything that has appeared within it. Every experience you've ever had, every thought, emotion, and sensation has come and gone. But the awareness that witnessed all of it has remained constant and untouched. This understanding transforms the entire project of spiritual practice. You're not trying to achieve a state you've never experienced. You're learning to recognize what is always already here. You're not working to become peaceful. You're discovering the peace that exists beneath all the commotion, like the ocean depths that remain still even when the surface is churning with waves. Feel into this possibility now. Can you sense the awareness that is present right now? Reading these words, hearing these sounds. That awareness doesn't come and go. It's always here, always present, simply watching everything else come and go. Thoughts appear in it and dissolve. Sensations arise and pass. But the awareness itself never wavers. This is your home ground. This is what you actually are, beyond all the temporary content of your experience. In a village marketplace that bustled with activity from dawn to dusk, there was a tea seller named Hana who had a reputation for the most peaceful presence anyone had encountered. People would seek out her stall not just for the quality of her tea, but for the sense of calm that seemed to emanate from her even in the chaos of the crowded market. A stressed businessman named Takeshi became curious about this tea seller. His own life felt like a constant emergency, always rushing, always behind, always anxious about the next deadline. He began stopping at Hana's stall regularly, at first just to buy tea, but increasingly to observe how she maintained such serenity in the midst of such chaos. One day, when the market was particularly crowded and noisy, Takeshi finally asked her directly, "Hana-san, how do you stay so peaceful in all this chaos? The noise, the crowds, the demands of customers. Doesn't it ever overwhelm you?" Hana finished pouring tea for another customer before responding. She handed Takeshi his usual order and gestured for him to sit on the small stool beside her stall. "Tell me," she said, "when you drink this tea, what do you taste?" Takeshi took a sip. "It's good. Slightly bitter, smooth, warming. And while you were tasting it, where was your attention?" "On the tea, obviously." "Exactly. In that moment of truly tasting, your mind was not scattered across yesterday's problems or tomorrow's deadlines. It was here, fully present with this sip of tea. This is my secret, if you want to call it that. I am always here, doing what I am doing in this moment." But Takeshi protested. "There's so much to think about. Business concerns, family responsibilities, future plans. How can you just be present when there's so much that needs attention?" Hana began preparing another customer's order as she spoke. "Watch how I make this tea. Right now, I am measuring these leaves. I am not measuring leaves while thinking about the customer I served an hour ago. I am not measuring leaves while worrying about whether I'll have enough supplies tomorrow. I am simply measuring leaves. This action receives my full attention. She poured hot water over the leaves. Now I am pouring water. My whole being is in this act of pouring. Not because I force it to be, but because I have learned that when I am fully present with what I'm doing, there is no room for anxiety or stress. Those feelings come only when part of my mind is here and part is somewhere else, usually imagining problems that aren't actually happening right now. Takeshi watched her work for a while, noticing how each movement seemed complete in itself. There was no rushing, no sense of her being mentally ahead of her actions. When she was stirring, she was completely stirring. When she was serving, she was completely serving. "But what about important decisions?" he asked. "What about planning for the future? Surely you can't just live completely in the present moment." Hana smiled. "When it is time to plan, I plan with my full attention. When it is time to make decisions, I give that process my complete presence. But I don't spend my entire day planning and deciding. I don't carry those concerns with me into every moment. When I am serving tea, that is all I am doing. When I am planning inventory, that receives my full attention. Each task in its own time, with complete presence." She handed tea to the waiting customer and turned back to Takeshi. "Your mind is like a theater with 100 actors, all trying to perform different plays at the same time. The result is chaos and exhaustion. My mind is like a theater, where one actor performs one play fully, then leaves the stage before the next actor begins. This is not something that requires special ability. It simply requires practice in bringing wandering attention back to what is actually happening right now." Over the following weeks, Takeshi began trying to apply this teaching in his own life. It was harder than he expected. His mind had decades of practice in being everywhere except the present moment. But gradually, he began to notice small shifts. When he practiced giving his full attention to one task at a time, that task took less time and required less energy than when he tried to do it while mentally juggling 5 other concerns. He discovered that much of his stress came not from the actual demands of his life, but from his habit of carrying all demands simultaneously in his mind. In any given moment, he was usually doing only one thing, but his mind would be cataloging everything else that also needed to be done, creating a sense of overwhelming pressure that made even simple tasks feel burdensome. One morning, while shaving, Takeshi had a small breakthrough. He realized he was trying to shave while mentally rehearsing a difficult conversation he needed to have later that day. His body was standing at the sink, moving a razor across his face, but his attention was hours in the future. He paused, took a breath, and brought his attention back to just shaving. The feel of warm water on his face, the careful movement of the razor, the morning light coming through the window. For those few minutes of simply shaving, without the overlay of mental planning and worry, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. Nothing had changed except where he placed his attention. The difficult conversation still awaited him later. All his responsibilities remained exactly the same, but in that moment, he was just a man shaving, and that was enough. That evening, Takeshi returned to Hana's tea stall with new understanding. "I experienced what you were teaching," he told her. "Just for a few minutes this morning, I was completely present with what I was doing, and all my stress disappeared." Hana nodded knowingly. "And what happened when those few minutes ended?" "The stress came back when my mind started jumping ahead again to everything I needed to do. Of course, because the stress doesn't live in your actual circumstances. It lives in your mental habit of living everywhere except right now. The good news is that habits can be changed through practice. Each time you notice your mind has wandered into past or future, you have an opportunity to gently bring it back to the present. This is not fighting with your mind. It's training it the way you might train a puppy to walk beside you instead of running in all directions." "But how do I remember to do this throughout the day?" Takeshi asked. "I get caught up in the momentum of everything I'm doing." Hana suggested a practice. Choose 3 activities you do every single day, perhaps drinking your morning tea, washing your hands, and walking from your car to your office. Make these your practice moments. Commit to bringing your full attention to these activities whenever you do them. They become anchors, reminders to return to presence. Takeshi chose morning tea, his commute, and evening dinner. These 3 times each day would be his practice of complete presence. At first, he often forgot his commitment, realizing only halfway through his commute that his mind had been spinning through work scenarios the entire drive. But gradually, these activities began to automatically trigger a shift in his attention. When he sat down with morning tea, his mind would settle into the present moment. The taste of the tea, the warmth of the cup, the quiet of the morning. What surprised him most was how this practice began to affect the rest of his day. The moments of complete presence created a quality that lingered. Even during busy work periods, he found himself more able to focus on one task at a time. The constant background anxiety that had been his companion for years began to quiet. 6 months after his first conversation with Hana about presence, Takeshi's life looked largely the same from the outside. He still had a demanding job, family responsibilities, and a full schedule. But his internal experience had transformed dramatically. Where he once felt constantly overwhelmed, he now felt mostly capable. Where anxiety had been his baseline state, peace became increasingly familiar. One day, a colleague commented on the change. "You seem different lately, calmer somehow. What happened?" Takeshi thought about how to explain. "I learned that I was creating most of my own stress by trying to live in multiple times at once. Now, I practice being where I actually am, doing what I'm actually doing." It sounds simple, but it changed everything. His colleague looked skeptical. "But don't you need to think ahead? Don't you need to plan and anticipate?" "Of course. But there's a difference between useful planning during designated time set aside for planning and constant anxiety masquerading as planning. I still plan. I just don't carry the emotional weight of everything I need to do into every moment. When I'm eating lunch, I'm eating lunch. When I'm planning, I plan with full attention. When I'm with my family, I'm actually present with them instead of mentally at the office." This teaching about presence addresses one of the primary sources of modern suffering: the fragmentation of attention. Technology and culture have trained us to be constantly accessible, constantly multitasking, constantly aware of everything we're not doing. But the human mind functions optimally when attention is unified rather than scattered. The tea seller's wisdom shows that presence is not an esoteric spiritual achievement. It's simply the practice of being fully engaged with whatever you're doing right now. This doesn't require special circumstances or hours of meditation. It can be practiced while making tea, shaving, driving, or having a conversation. Any activity becomes a vehicle for presence when you give it your complete attention. Notice the quality of your attention right now. Is it fully here with these words? Or is part of it planning tomorrow, replaying today, or wandering to something else entirely? There's no judgment in noticing. Simply become aware of how your attention moves and whether it's unified or scattered. This awareness itself begins to unify attention, drawing it back from wherever it has wandered. The practice of choosing anchor activities throughout your day creates structure for remembering presence. Without these deliberate touch points, it's easy to go through entire days on autopilot, attention scattered across 1,000 concerns, never fully present anywhere. But when you designate specific activities as opportunities for practice, you create regular invitations to return home to the present moment. Let your breathing become your anchor right now. No need to change it or control it. Simply notice the natural rhythm of breathing. This is always happening, always available as a doorway to presence. Whenever you notice your mind has wandered into past or future, into story or worry, you can return attention to breathing. This simple practice, repeated over time, transforms your relationship with the present moment. In the mountains, where winter came early and stayed late, there was a small temple that served the spiritual needs of several remote villages. The head priest of this temple was a man named Sojin, who had earned a reputation for remarkable patience and kindness. People brought him their problems, their grief, their confusion, and he would listen with such complete attention that many said simply being in his presence brought healing. But Sojin had not always been this way. In his younger years as a priest, he had been quick to judge, easy to irritate, and frequently frustrated by the limitations and failings of the people who came to him for guidance. He had entered religious life with idealistic visions of profound spiritual conversations and meaningful work. Instead, he found himself dealing with petty disputes between neighbors, listening to the same complaints repeatedly, and feeling increasingly cynical about human nature. His teacher, an ancient monk named Roshi, watched Sojin's growing bitterness with concern. One winter evening, when snow fell heavily outside and the temple was quiet, Roshi invited Sojin to share tea with him. "Tell me," Roshi said as he poured tea with careful attention, "what troubles you most about your work here?" Sojin didn't hesitate. "The people who come to me, they don't really want to change. They want me to validate their complaints or tell them their problems are someone else's fault. They ask for guidance and then don't follow it. It feels pointless." Roshi nodded, sipping his tea slowly. "And how does this make you feel toward them?" "Frustrated, sometimes angry, often disappointed. I entered this life to help people awaken spiritually, but most of them just want someone to agree with their grievances." The old monk was quiet for a long time, simply sitting with his tea, watching the snow fall outside the window. Finally, he spoke. "When you look at the people who come to you, what do you see?" "I see their problems," Sojin replied. "Their stubbornness, their unwillingness to take responsibility, their endless complaints." "And do you see their suffering?" Sojin paused. "Of course I see that they're suffering. That's why they come to me." "No," Roshi said gently. "You see their problems, but do you see their suffering? Do you feel it? Do you understand that every complaint, every difficult behavior, every stubbornness comes from pain that they don't know how to ease?" Sojin felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. "I suppose. I haven't really thought about it that way." Roshi refilled their teacups. "Let me tell you a story. When I was young like you, I worked in a hospital. My job was to help prepare bodies after people died. It was not pleasant work. Many of the bodies came from difficult deaths. Some had been sick for a long time. Some had died violently. Some had been alone when they died." He paused, remembering. "At first, I found the work disturbing and sad. I would finish my shifts feeling heavy with all the tragedy I had witnessed. But over time, something changed in how I perceived these bodies. I began to see each one as a person who had carried suffering throughout their entire life. Every difficult behavior they had ever exhibited, every complaint they had ever made, every stubborn refusal to change, it all came from the same source: the desperate attempt to avoid or ease suffering that is built into human existence." Roshi looked directly at Sojin. "The woman who comes to you complaining about her neighbor is not being petty. She is experiencing pain and doesn't know how to process it skillfully. The man who asks for guidance and doesn't follow it is not being stubborn. He is terrified of change and doesn't know how to work with that fear. When you see problems instead of suffering, you maintain distance. But when you see suffering, compassion naturally arises." That night, Sojin lay awake, thinking about his teacher's words. He had been so focused on whether people were doing spiritual practice correctly that he had lost touch with why they needed spiritual practice in the first place. They came to him carrying pain, and he had been judging whether they were carrying it in the right way. The next morning, a woman came to see him. She was someone who visited frequently, always with complaints about various people in her life who had wronged her. Usually, Sojin would listen with barely concealed impatience, waiting for her to finish so he could tell her, once again, that she needed to forgive and move on. But this time, he listened differently. He didn't focus on the content of her complaints. Instead, he paid attention to the pain underneath them. He noticed the loneliness in her voice, the fear that she was fundamentally unlovable, the desperation to be heard and validated. For the first time, he truly saw her suffering. When she finished speaking, instead of offering his usual advice about forgiveness, Sogen said simply, "It sounds like you feel very alone." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel like no one really sees me or cares about me." "I see you," Sogen said, "and I understand that the pain of feeling invisible is real and difficult." Something in the quality of his attention, the genuine care in his voice, touched her in a way his previous advice never had. She began to cry. Not the bitter tears of resentment, but the releasing tears of being truly heard. When she left the temple that day, her complaints about others had transformed into acknowledgement of her own loneliness and fear. She had taken the first real step toward healing. Over the following months, Sogen practiced this shift in perception with everyone who came to him. The stubborn man who refused to reconcile with his son was no longer just stubborn to Sogen. He was terrified of vulnerability. The gossiping woman, who spread rumors, wasn't just creating problems, she was desperately trying to feel important and connected. The angry teenager who disrespected his parents wasn't just being difficult, he was in pain he didn't have words for. This shift didn't mean Sogen stopped offering guidance or setting boundaries, but his guidance now came from a place of genuine compassion rather than judgment, and people could feel the difference. They opened more readily to his suggestions because they felt seen and understood rather than criticized and dismissed. Years later, when other young priests would ask Sogen how he maintained such patience with difficult people, he would share Roshi's teaching. Everyone who comes to you is suffering. They may not know it. They may express it as anger or stubbornness or complaint. But underneath every difficult behavior is pain seeking relief. When you remember this, patience and compassion arise naturally. He would continue. The person who irritates you most is often the one who is suffering most deeply and has the fewest skills for working with that suffering. They deserve your compassion more than anyone else, not less. This doesn't mean tolerating harm or abuse. It means responding to difficulty with understanding, rather than adding more judgment and rejection to their already heavy burden. This teaching about seeing suffering rather than just problems transforms relationships at every level. When your child is having a tantrum, you can see only the inconvenient behavior, or you can see the overwhelm and lack of coping skills driving that behavior. When your partner says something hurtful, you can see only the attack, or you can see the pain and fear that produce those words. When a coworker is being difficult, you can see only the obstacle to your work, or you can recognize someone struggling with pressures you may not even know about. This shift in perception doesn't make you weak or naive. It makes you wiser and more effective at actually helping rather than just reacting. When you respond to someone's underlying suffering with compassion, you create space for real change. When you respond only to their difficult behavior with judgment and rejection, you typically reinforce the very patterns you wish would change. The practice is simple, but requires vigilance. When someone's behavior triggers your frustration or judgment, pause. Take one breath. Ask yourself, what suffering might be underneath this behavior? You don't need to know the answer with certainty. Simply opening to the question shifts your perception and softens your response. In this moment, you can practice with yourself. Whatever difficulties you've been experiencing, whatever behaviors you judge in yourself, can you see the suffering underneath them? Your procrastination might be fear of failure. Your irritability might be exhaustion and overwhelm. Your withdrawal might be a need for safety that you don't know how to communicate directly. When you see your own suffering with compassion rather than judgment, you create the conditions for natural healing and change. Rest in this understanding now, that all beings, including you, are doing their best with their current level of understanding and capacity. That what looks like failure or stubbornness or difficult behavior is often pain seeking relief in the only ways it knows. That compassion is not just a nice idea, but a realistic response to the actual human condition. In a monastery famous for its beautiful calligraphy, there lived a master named Teshu whose brushwork was considered the finest in the region. Students came from distant provinces to learn from him, hoping to acquire his skill and precision. But those who stayed long enough discovered that Teshu's teaching was about much more than technique. A talented young calligrapher named Aiko arrived at the monastery with impressive skills already developed. She could reproduce traditional characters with remarkable accuracy. Her brushwork was confident and technically proficient. She expected Teshu to refine her existing abilities and help her achieve true mastery. In their first lesson, Teshu asked Aiko to write a simple character, the word for peace. She approached the task with her usual confidence, took up the brush, and created a character that was technically perfect. Every stroke was precisely placed, every proportion correct. Teshu studied it for a long moment. "Very good technique," he said. "Now do it again, but this time, don't try to write the character. Let the character write itself through you." Aiko didn't understand the instruction. How could the character write itself? Someone had to move the brush. But she tried again, this time attempting to relax her usual control. The result was sloppier, less perfect than her first attempt. "Again," Teshu said, "and this time, pay attention not to what the brush is doing on the paper, but to the space in your mind from which the movement arises." Aiko wrote the character 30 times that day. Each time, Teshu would point to some subtle quality in her brushwork that revealed where she was trying to control the outcome rather than allowing it to emerge naturally. By the end of the session, she was exhausted and confused. She had always succeeded by applying more effort and control. Now her teacher was asking her to somehow do less while achieving more. Over the following weeks, Teshu had Aiko practice a single character hundreds of times. The same one, peace. She began to understand that he wasn't teaching her calligraphy. He was teaching her about the relationship between effort and allowing, between trying and trusting. One morning, after a particularly frustrating practice session, Teshu invited Aiko to walk with him in the monastery garden. They stopped beside a stream where water flowed over smooth rocks. "Watch the water," Teshu said. "Does it try to flow? Does it make effort to move around obstacles?" "No," Aiko replied. "It simply flows according to its nature and the landscape. And yet it accomplishes the seemingly impossible. Over centuries, this soft water wears away hard stone, not through force or effort, but through persistent, gentle presence. Your brushwork has too much trying in it. You are using force where the ancient masters used flow." He picked up a fallen leaf and placed it on the water's surface. The leaf immediately began moving with the current, turning and spinning effortlessly around rocks and through eddies. This is how the brush should move through your hand, not pushed by your will, but carried by something deeper than intention. "But I have to intend to write," Aiko protested. "The brush won't move itself." "Of course you have intention. But there is a difference between intention that guides and intention that controls. When you guide, you set a direction and then allow the natural intelligence of the body and the brush and the moment to express themselves. When you control, you micromanage every tiny movement, and the result is tight, lifeless, even if technically correct." Teshu demonstrated, taking up a brush and writing the character for peace. His movements were relaxed yet precise, effortless yet perfect. Aiko could see the difference between his work and hers. His characters had a quality of aliveness, as if the ink itself was breathing on the paper. Hers, despite being technically accurate, felt dead by comparison. "How do I learn this?" she asked. "By letting go of your need for perfection. By trusting that when you practice the fundamentals correctly and then release control, something authentic can emerge. Your skill gives you the vocabulary, but then you must stop speaking with effort and allow the deeper wisdom of presence to speak through you. For months, Aiko practiced this different relationship with her art. Slowly, painfully, she learned to recognize the quality of tightness that came from too much control. She began to feel when she was forcing the brush rather than allowing it to move naturally through her prepared hand. The improvement wasn't linear. Some days she would touch that quality of effortless flow. Other days, she would fall back into her habitual controlling. But gradually, something fundamental shifted in her calligraphy. Her characters began to carry the same quality of aliveness she had seen in Tesshu's work. The technical skill was still present, but now it served something deeper than mere correctness. It served authentic expression. One day, nearly a year after her arrival, Aiko was practicing the character for peace when she experienced a breakthrough. She prepared the ink, arranged the paper, took up the brush, and then there was simply writing. No sense of Aiko trying to make something happen. No micromanagement of each stroke. Just the character emerging through her hand as naturally as breath moving through her body. When she finished, she sat back and looked at what she had created. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever written, not because it was technically superior to her earlier work, but because it was alive. Something true had passed through her onto the paper. Tesshu happened to walk by at that moment. He glanced at the character and smiled. "Ah," he said simply. "Now you understand." "What do I understand?" Aiko asked, though she knew the answer already. That mastery is not about perfect control. It is about perfect trust. You have learned to get yourself out of the way and let the calligraphy do itself. This is true of all arts, all skills, all of life. The paradox is that we must practice diligently to develop our abilities, but then we must trust those abilities enough to stop interfering with them. Aiko remained at the monastery for several more years, but her learning had fundamentally transformed. She still practiced daily, still refined her skills, but now she understood that technical improvement was just the preparation. The real art emerged when she learned to trust what she had prepared and allow it to express itself without interference from the anxious, controlling part of her mind. When she eventually left the monastery to teach calligraphy in her home province, students were struck by the quality of presence in her work. They would ask her secret, and she would share Tesshu's teaching about the relationship between effort and allowing. "We must practice diligently," she would explain. "This gives us the vocabulary, the tools, the prepared ground from which art can emerge. But then, in the moment of creation, we must release our grip on controlling the outcome. We must trust that our preparation has made us ready and allow the expression to flow naturally." Many students struggled with this teaching just as she had. They wanted to know exactly how to do it, what steps to follow. But Aiko understood that the shift couldn't be taught through instructions. It could only be discovered through patient practice and the willingness to release control, even when releasing felt like losing something important. The teaching of the calligrapher illuminates a profound truth about how mastery actually works in any domain. We imagine that expertise means perfect control, the ability to micromanage every detail and force desired outcomes. But true mastery involves a paradox. We develop great skill through disciplined practice, and then we learn to trust that skill enough to stop interfering with its natural expression. This applies far beyond calligraphy. Athletes speak of being in the zone, a state where their trained body performs brilliantly without conscious control. Musicians describe moments when the music plays itself through them. Writers talk about words flowing effortlessly when they get their anxious editor mind out of the way. In each case, mastery involves this quality of prepared spontaneity, of trusting your training enough to let go in the moment of performance. The same principle applies to daily living. You develop wisdom through experience, study, and practice. But then in the moment of meeting life, you must trust that wisdom rather than anxiously trying to control every outcome. The mother who has learned about child development must still trust herself in the unpredictable moments of actual parenting. The leader who has studied management principles must release control and trust their intuition in complex situations. This teaching connects deeply with the Buddhist understanding of non-attachment to outcomes. When Eiko was attached to creating perfect calligraphy, her attachment itself prevented the perfection she sought. Her tight grip on the desired outcome created tension that made her work lifeless. But when she learned to care deeply about her art while holding the results lightly, paradoxically, her work improved dramatically. Notice in your own life where excessive control might be interfering with natural excellence. Perhaps you're trying so hard to say the right thing in conversations that you can't listen naturally and respond authentically. Perhaps you're so focused on making your meditation perfect that you prevent the natural settling that happens when you simply sit with kind attention. Perhaps you're micromanaging your children so carefully that they can't develop their own competence and judgment. The invitation is not to abandon all guidance and structure. Eiko still used proper technique and Teshu still taught fundamentals carefully. But within that structure, there must be space for natural expression. Within your prepared life, there must be room for spontaneity and trust. Feel this balance right now in your body. There is the structure of lying or sitting in a particular position. Within that structure, there is the natural flow of breath moving without your control. There are thoughts arising and dissolving without your permission. Your body is performing thousands of processes without consulting you. All of this natural functioning happens not despite your lack of control, but because of it. Your body knows how to breathe, how to digest, how to heal. Your task is not to manage these processes, but to trust them and support them with wise conditions. Let yourself settle more deeply now into this trust. You don't need to control your path to sleep. Your body and mind know how to make this transition. Your job is simply to create the right conditions. A comfortable position, a quiet environment, the intention to rest. Then release your grip on making it happen and allow the natural process to unfold. In a farming village where rice cultivation had been practiced for countless generations, there lived an old farmer named Jiro, who was known for consistently producing excellent harvests despite conditions that challenged other farmers. Young farmers would ask his secret, expecting to learn special techniques or hidden knowledge. But Jiro's explanation was always simple and somewhat puzzling. I work with what is given. One year, a young farmer named Hiro was struggling with his first season of independent farming. His father had passed away unexpectedly, leaving Hiro responsible for land he didn't feel prepared to manage. The spring rains were unusually light. The summer heat came early and intense. Disease appeared in several of his fields. By midsummer, Hiro was exhausted and discouraged, certain his first independent harvest would be a disaster. In his frustration, he went to visit Jiro. "Old uncle," he said, "I don't understand how you consistently succeed when conditions are so unpredictable. This year has been terrible. Light rain, early heat, disease in my fields. I've worked hard, but nothing seems to help." Jiro invited Hiro to walk through his fields with him. As they walked, Hiro noticed that Jiro's crops looked healthier than his own, though they were experiencing the same challenging weather. "Tell me," Jiro said, "what did you expect from this growing season?" "I expected normal conditions," Hiro replied. "Adequate rain, typical temperatures, healthy plants. That's what I planned for. And when you didn't get what you expected, how did you respond?" "I tried to compensate. I watered more to make up for the light rain. I worked longer hours trying to control the disease. I worried constantly about the early heat damaging the crops." Jiro nodded. "And how much energy did you spend wishing things were different than they were?" Hiro thought about this. "A lot of energy, I suppose. Every day I would think about how this should have been a normal year, how unfair it was to face such difficulties in my first season alone." "There is your problem," Jiro said gently. "You were farming the conditions you wished you had rather than the conditions you actually had. This year didn't need more water to replicate a normal rain pattern. It needed different crops, different planting density, different timing. You weren't working with what was given. You were fighting against what was given and trying to force it into the shape you expected. They stopped beside one of Jiro's fields, where the plants, though smaller than in a typical year, looked vigorous and healthy. When the light rains came, I planted varieties that need less water. When I saw the early heat arriving, I adjusted my schedule to harvest earlier than usual. When disease appeared, I removed affected plants immediately, rather than trying to save them and risk spreading the problem. I didn't waste energy wishing for different weather. I used all my energy responding to the weather I actually had. But how do you know what adjustments to make? Hiro asked. Through long experience, yes, but more importantly, through accepting reality as it is, rather than arguing with it. When you accept that this is a light rain year, you can think clearly about what light rain years need. When you're busy being upset that it's not a normal rain year, your mind is not available for creative response. Hiro realized he had been doing exactly this. He had spent so much mental and emotional energy resisting the challenging conditions that little remained for adapting to them skillfully. His suffering came not primarily from the difficult weather, but from his constant wish that the weather were different. Over the remaining months of the growing season, Hiro practiced Jiro's teaching about working with what is given. When he noticed himself thinking about how things should be, he would redirect that energy toward responding to how things actually were. The shift was both simple and profound. His harvest that year was modest but respectable, much better than he had feared during his summer of resistance and worry. But more importantly, he had learned something that would serve him for the rest of his farming career. That fighting against conditions as they are only exhausts you, while accepting and working with conditions as they are conserves energy for skillful response. Years later, when Hiro had become a skilled farmer in his own right, he would share Jiro's teaching with others who were struggling. The weather will be what it is, he would explain. The market will fluctuate. Diseases and pests will come. You cannot control these forces, but you can choose whether to waste your energy fighting against what is already true, or direct all your energy toward responding wisely to what is actually happening. He would continue. Every moment you spend wishing things were different is a moment you're not fully present to work with things as they are. This doesn't mean you stop having preferences. I still prefer good weather to bad weather, but I don't let my preference prevent me from seeing clearly and responding skillfully to whatever weather actually arrives. The farmer's teaching illuminates something essential about acceptance in the face of difficulty. We often confuse acceptance with passivity, imagining it means we stop trying to improve situations or solve problems. But Jiro's approach shows that genuine acceptance is actually what makes effective action possible. When you stop arguing with reality, all that energy becomes available for working with reality. This principle appears throughout Buddhist teaching. The second noble truth explains that suffering comes from tanha, often translated as craving or thirst, but more precisely understood as the demanding that reality be other than it is. We crave for pleasant experiences to continue and unpleasant experiences to stop. We demand that conditions conform to our preferences. This demanding, this resistance to what is, creates enormous suffering beyond whatever difficulty we're actually facing. The farmer who fights against a drought doesn't make rain appear. He simply adds the suffering of resistance to the challenge of limited water. But the farmer who accepts the drought can think creatively about drought-resistant crops, water conservation, alternative planting schedules. His acceptance doesn't mean he likes the drought. It means he's freed his mental energy from futile resistance and directed it toward useful response. Notice in your own experience how much energy goes into wishing things were different. Perhaps you're lying here wishing you were already asleep. That wish doesn't hasten sleep. It often prevents it by creating tension. Perhaps you're thinking about some situation in your life, wishing it were different than it is. That wish doesn't change the situation. but it does add an extra layer of suffering to whatever difficulty already exists. The practice is to notice when you're arguing with what is already true. Your body is experiencing some discomfort. Rather than accepting this and adjusting position if needed, you might spend energy resisting the discomfort, wishing it weren't there, telling yourself stories about why it shouldn't be happening. This resistance amplifies the discomfort and prevents you from responding to it simply and directly. Acceptance begins with acknowledgement. This is what is actually happening right now. My mind is still active. My body has some tension. I'm not yet asleep. These are simple facts, requiring no judgment, demanding no emotional response. When you can meet facts as facts rather than as problems or injustices, your relationship with experience transforms completely. In a quiet temple where monks gathered each evening for meditation, there was a tradition that seemed strange to newcomers. After the meditation period ended, instead of immediately dispersing to their next activities, the monks would sit in a circle and share a single sentence about their experience. Not analysis or description, just one simple acknowledgement. Tonight, restlessness was present, or tonight, peace was present, or tonight, sleepiness was present. A young monk named Kenji initially found this practice pointless. What good did it do to simply name his experience? Wasn't the point of meditation to have certain experiences and not have others? Shouldn't they be discussing how to achieve better states and eliminate problematic ones? But the senior monks treated all reports equally. No one congratulated those who reported peaceful meditation or offered suggestions to those who reported difficult sessions. They simply listened, acknowledged, and moved on. The message was clear. All experiences were equally valid, equally worthy of acknowledgement, equally part of the practice. Over time, Kenji began to understand the profound wisdom in this simple practice. By simply naming his experience without judgment or elaboration, he was learning to see it clearly without getting entangled in stories about it. Tonight, frustration was present, was very different from, I had a terrible meditation and I'm failing at this practice and I'll never get it right. The first statement was a simple fact. The second was a story that amplified suffering and obscured clear seeing. By practicing the acknowledgement without story, Kenji was training himself to meet experience directly rather than through the distorting lens of judgment and interpretation. One evening, after reporting, "Tonight, doubt was present," the abbot spoke to the group about the practice. "What you are learning here," he said, "is not just a way of reporting meditation experience, it is a way of meeting all of life. When you can simply acknowledge what is present without immediately spinning it into a story about what it means, you develop a kind of freedom that no amount of perfect experiences could provide." He continued, "The mind wants to make everything significant. It wants to turn a moment of doubt into evidence that you're on the wrong path. It wants to turn a moment of peace into proof that you're making progress. But both of these interpretations take you away from the simple, direct reality of the experience itself. Doubt arose. Peace arose. These are just phenomena appearing in awareness, no more significant than clouds appearing in the sky." Kenji noticed that this practice began to affect how he met difficulties outside of meditation as well. When he made a mistake during work, instead of the usual cascade of self-criticism and worry, he would simply acknowledge, a mistake was made. This acknowledgement created space for learning from the error without the additional suffering of harsh judgment. When conflict arose with another monk, instead of constructing elaborate stories about who was right and wrong, he could acknowledge, disagreement is present. This acknowledgement allowed him to stay present with the actual situation rather than lost in mental narratives about it. The abbot taught that this practice of simple acknowledgement was a profound expression of acceptance. Not acceptance as in approval, but acceptance as in clear seeing of what is actually present. You cannot work skillfully with experience you refuse to see clearly. You cannot respond wisely to situations you're busy denying or elaborating into something they're not. Years later, Kenji became a teacher himself. He maintained the practice of simple acknowledgement in his own meditation hall, but he also taught his students to apply it throughout their day. When you notice yourself getting caught in stories and judgments, he would instruct, practice coming back to simple acknowledgement. Anger is present, sadness is present, confusion is present. This acknowledgement doesn't mean you like what's present or think it should stay forever. It simply means you're willing to see clearly what is actually here right now. This teaching about simple acknowledgement offers a powerful tool for working with any difficulty. The human mind is a meaning-making machine, constantly interpreting experiences and creating narratives about what they signify. But these narratives often create more suffering than the original experiences themselves. When you practice simple acknowledgement, you interrupt the narrative-making habit. You create a gap between the experience and your interpretation of it. In that gap lies freedom. The experience itself may be uncomfortable, but without the elaborating story, it becomes workable. You can be with difficulty directly, rather than with your frightening thoughts about what the difficulty means. Notice right now what is actually present in your immediate experience. Don't interpret or analyze. Simply acknowledge. Breath moving, some sounds in the environment, thoughts appearing and dissolving, body sensations of various kinds. This simple, direct acknowledgement creates a quality of presence that is fundamentally peaceful, regardless of what content is being acknowledged. In a mountain village where winters were long and harsh, the community had developed many traditions for maintaining spirits during the dark months. One of these traditions was the evening story circle, where villagers would gather around fires and share tales that carried wisdom through the generations. One particular winter was especially difficult. Heavy snows isolated the village for weeks. Food stores ran lower than expected. Several families lost members to illness. The mood grew dark and heavy, with many people falling into despair about their circumstances. An elderly woman named Grandmother Suki, who had lived through many such winters, decided the evening story circles needed to address the growing despair directly. One night, she told a story that became legendary in that village. Long ago, she began, there was a weaver who created the most beautiful tapestries in all the land. Her work was sought by nobles and merchants who would pay handsomely for her creations. But the weaver had a problem. She could only create when she felt happy. If sadness or worry entered her heart, her hands would freeze, unable to continue their intricate work. This limitation troubled her greatly. She believed she should be happy all the time if she wanted to be productive and successful. So, whenever difficult emotions arose, she would fight against them, trying to force herself back into happiness. But this fighting created even more unhappiness, and her work suffered accordingly. One day, a traveling monk visited her workshop. He saw her finest tapestry hanging on the wall and admired its beauty. "Tell me," he said, "what inspired this masterpiece?" The weaver explained it was created during the happiest period of her life, after the birth of her first child. Everything in that piece spoke of joy and light and new beginnings. "Beautiful," the monk agreed. "And do you have other work I might see?" Reluctantly, the weaver showed him a tapestry she had hidden away, one she considered a failure. "This was created during a dark time," she explained. "My mother had just died, and I was heavy with grief. I tried not to work because I believed only happiness could create beauty. But one night, unable to sleep, I went to my loom and wove my sadness into the threads." The monk studied this second tapestry for a long time. Then he said something that changed the weaver's life forever. "This piece," he said, pointing to the grief tapestry, "is the most profound work of art I have ever seen. The other is beautiful, yes, like a spring morning. But this one has depth that takes my breath away. This one speaks to the full human experience." The weaver was shocked. but it came from sadness. Surely happiness creates better work than sorrow. The monk shook his head gently. Happiness creates one kind of beauty. Sadness creates another kind. Anger creates another. Fear creates another. Each emotion, when truly felt and honestly expressed, creates its own unique truth. You have been trying to weave only with threads of one color, but the most magnificent tapestries use the full spectrum. From that day forward, the weaver stopped fighting her emotions. When happiness came, she wove with golden threads. When sadness came, she wove with deep blues and purples. When fear arose, she wove with sharp contrasts of light and shadow. Her work became legendary not because it was always cheerful, but because it was always true. Grandmother Suki let the story settle in the silence of the gathered villagers. Then she spoke directly to their situation. This winter has been difficult. Many of us are sad, worried, afraid. We believe we should be strong and cheerful, and we judge ourselves harshly when we cannot force these feelings. But what if, like the weaver, we are trying to live with only one color of thread? She continued, sadness is not wrong. Fear is not weakness. Worry is not failure. These are simply the colors this winter brings. If we can let them be here, acknowledge them without judgment, we might discover they have their own beauty and wisdom to offer. Fighting against them only adds suffering to suffering. Accepting them, weaving them into our experience honestly, creates a life that is whole rather than false. The story resonated deeply with the villagers. In the following weeks, people began to speak more honestly about their struggles. Instead of pretending to be fine, they would acknowledge fear, grief, and worry. This honesty created a quality of connection and mutual support that had been missing when everyone was trying to maintain a facade of strength. The winter was still difficult. The conditions didn't change, but the community's relationship with those conditions transformed completely. By accepting the full spectrum of their emotional responses, rather than fighting to feel only certain approved emotions, they discovered a resilience and authenticity that carried them through. When spring finally came and the village emerged from isolation, people spoke of that difficult winter as a time of unexpected growth. They had learned that wholeness doesn't come from experiencing only pleasant emotions, but from being present with the full range of human feeling without judgment or resistance. This story teaches something essential about emotional acceptance. In modern culture, we often treat difficult emotions as problems to be solved or eliminated. We believe mental health means feeling good, and any deviation from positive states indicates something is wrong. But this understanding creates enormous unnecessary suffering. Emotions are not good or bad, right or wrong. They are information, responses to conditions, natural movements of consciousness. Sadness is the appropriate response to loss. Fear is the natural response to threat or uncertainty. Anger arises to protect boundaries or signal injustice. These emotions become problems only when we add resistance and judgment to their natural arising. The weaver's discovery that all emotions create their own kind of beauty when honestly expressed points to something profound about authentic living. When you allow yourself to feel what you actually feel without shame or judgment, you access a wholeness that manufactured positivity can never provide. Your life becomes textured, deep, real, rather than a flat performance of acceptable emotions. This doesn't mean indulging every impulse or acting out every feeling. The weaver wove her emotions into tapestries. She didn't throw her sadness at others. Emotional acceptance is about internal permission to feel, not external permission to harm. You can acknowledge anger without attacking others. You can feel grief without becoming lost in it. You can notice fear without being controlled by it. The practice is to welcome the full spectrum of your emotional experience with the same hospitality you might show diverse guests at a safe rest gathering. Some guests are easy and pleasant. Others are difficult and challenging. but all are part of the richness of human life. When you stop insisting that only certain emotions are acceptable, you discover the resilience that comes from being able to be with whatever arises. Feel into your emotional landscape right now without judgment. Is there contentment present? Restlessness? Sadness? Peace? Whatever is here, can you simply acknowledge it without needing it to be different? This is the practice of emotional acceptance. Not forcing positive feelings, but making room for whatever is true. In a monastery dedicated to the practice of mindfulness in all activities, there was a monk named Takuan who had been assigned to work in the kitchen. His primary responsibility was washing dishes after the community's meals. It was simple work, repetitive and humble, and Takuan initially felt it was beneath his capabilities and aspirations. He had come to the monastery to achieve enlightenment, to study profound teachings, to experience deep meditative states. Instead, he spent hours each day with his hands in soapy water, scrubbing bowls and pots. His mind would wander during this work, planning what he would do when he had more important responsibilities, imagining the profound insights he would have during meditation periods, wishing he were anywhere but at the washing station. The head cook, an old monk named Genzo, noticed Takuan's distracted, resentful presence. One day, he invited Takuan to sit with him after the evening meal cleanup. "Tell me," Genzo said, "what are you doing when you wash dishes?" Takuan thought the question was obvious. "I'm washing dishes, getting them clean so they can be used for the next meal." "Are you?" Genzo asked. "Because when I watch you work, I see someone whose body is washing dishes while his mind is somewhere else entirely. So what are you actually doing?" Takuan felt defensive. "I'm doing what I'm assigned to do. The dishes get clean. What more is required? The dishes get clean, yes, but you remain dirty. Your mind is filled with resistance, resentment, and the constant wish to be doing something else. You are missing the opportunity that dishwashing offers." "What opportunity?" Takuan asked with barely concealed sarcasm. "What profound teaching could possibly come from scrubbing bowls?" Genzo smiled gently. "The most profound teaching of all. How to be fully present with your actual life, instead of living in fantasies about a different life. Right now, in this monastery, dishwashing is your life. Until you learn to be present with washing dishes, you will not be present with anything else either. Your mind will always be somewhere other than where you are." He continued, "You came here seeking enlightenment, but enlightenment is not a special experience you have while sitting on a meditation cushion. It is the capacity to be fully present with whatever you are doing, whether that is sitting in meditation or washing dishes or sweeping paths. If you cannot find the sacred in washing a bowl, you will not find it anywhere." Takuan wanted to argue, but something in Genzo's words touched him. He had indeed been living in constant mental escape from his actual experience, always imagining that the real practice was happening somewhere else, sometime else, in some other activity. The next morning, when he went to wash the breakfast dishes, Takuan tried something different. Instead of letting his mind wander to other concerns, he brought his full attention to the immediate experience. The temperature of the water, the texture of the soap, the feeling of each bowl under his hands, the sound of water flowing, the satisfaction of seeing something dirty become clean. At first, his mind resisted, finding this focus boring and pointless. But he persisted, gently returning his attention each time it wandered. And slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The dishwashing itself became fascinating. He noticed details he had never seen before. How the light reflected off the wet ceramic, how the soap created patterns of bubbles, how each bowl had its own unique weight and texture. More importantly, he noticed something about the quality of his own presence. When he was fully engaged with washing dishes, all his other concerns naturally fell away. There was no room for resentment about his assignment when he was completely absorbed in the immediate task. There was no wishing to be elsewhere when he was truly here. After a week of this practice, Takuan experienced something profound during his dishwashing. For perhaps 20 minutes, There was simply washing happening. No sense of a separate self named Takwon who was performing the task. No mental commentary about the experience, just the immediate flow of awareness, water, bowls, hands moving in perfect harmony. It was the deepest meditation he had experienced since arriving at the monastery, and it happened not despite the humble task, but because of his complete presence with it. That evening, he sought out Genzo to share what had happened. The old monk listened with a knowing smile. Now you begin to understand. The monastery doesn't have important tasks and unimportant tasks. It has only tasks. The importance comes from the quality of presence you bring to whatever you're doing. A bowl washed with complete attention is a profound spiritual practice. A sutra read with a distracted mind is merely noise. But Takwon had another question. Master, Genzo, I understand now about being present with dishwashing, but surely there are times when we need to think about the future, to plan and prepare. How do we balance presence with the practical need for planning? Genzo nodded. Excellent question. There is a time for planning, and when that time comes, you plan with full attention. But you don't spend your dishwashing time planning. You don't spend your sleeping time planning. You don't spend your eating time planning. Each activity receives your full presence. When it's time to wash dishes, there is only dishwashing. When it's time to plan, there is only planning. This is the discipline. He continued. The untrained mind believes it can do multiple things at once. It washes dishes while planning the future, eats meals while worrying about the past, sits in meditation while making mental lists. But this divided attention means you never fully experience anything. You are always partially absent from your own life. True efficiency, true effectiveness, comes from bringing undivided attention to one thing at a time. Over the months that followed, Takwon's entire experience of monastery life transformed. He continued washing dishes, but the resentment had completely dissolved. Each bowl became an opportunity to practice presence. Each pot became a teacher of patience and attention. The work he had considered beneath him became his most valued practice. Years later, when Takwon had become a teacher himself, he would often assign the most eager and ambitious students to simple, repetitive tasks. When they would protest that they came to learn profound teachings, not to wash dishes or sweep floors, he would share the lesson Genzo had taught him. You want to achieve enlightenment? He would ask. Then start by learning to wash a bowl with complete attention. Start by learning to be fully present with your actual life, instead of constantly wishing you were somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. The path to the extraordinary runs directly through the ordinary. There is no other way. The teaching of the dishwashing monk illuminates something essential about spiritual practice and about life itself. We often believe that meaning and fulfillment require special circumstances, important activities, significant achievements. We wait for conditions to be right, for our real life to begin, for the meaningful work to arrive. Meanwhile, we treat our actual daily activities as obstacles to be endured or rushed through on the way to something better. But this waiting, this constant future orientation, means we never actually arrive anywhere. We're always in transit, never at home in our own experience. The dishwasher's discovery was that presence transforms the ordinary into the profound, not by making dishwashing into something other than it is, but by bringing his full being to the simple act of washing dishes. This teaching applies everywhere. The parent who wishes their children were older misses the precious moments of who they are right now. The worker who treats their current job as merely a stepping stone to something better never experiences satisfaction with any job. The meditator who treats practice as a means to an achievement rather than being valuable in itself never touches the peace available in each moment of practice. The practice is to ask yourself repeatedly throughout the day, am I here? Am I fully present with what I'm doing right now? Or am I mentally somewhere else? When you notice you're absent, the practice is simply to return, not with judgment, not with force, but with the gentle willingness to be where you actually are. Notice right now whether you're fully present with these words or whether part of your mind is somewhere else. Are you here, or are you thinking about tomorrow, replaying today, planning, worrying, fantasizing? There's no judgment if you find yourself absent. Simply notice and gently return attention to what is actually happening in this moment. Your body is always in the present. It cannot be anywhere else. Your breath happens only now. Sounds arise and dissolve only now. When you rest attention in direct sensory experience, you naturally arrive in the present moment. This is always available as an anchor, a way home to what is actually happening instead of what you're thinking about. Let everything settle now into this moment's simplicity. There is breathing happening. There is awareness present. There are sensations in the body, sounds in the environment, thoughts passing through like clouds. All of this is simply occurring, requiring nothing from you except the willingness to be present with it. In a forest where ancient trees grew so thick that little light reached the ground, there was a path that monks from a nearby monastery walked each day. The path was difficult, root-crossed and uneven, requiring careful attention to avoid stumbling. Many monks complained about this difficult path, wishing for an easier route to their meditation hut deep in the woods. But one old monk, named Yuzen, never complained about the path. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the walk, taking it slowly and deliberately each day without any sign of frustration at its difficulty. A young monk named Daiso, who frequently twisted his ankles on the treacherous routes, finally asked Yuzen how he managed to walk the path with such ease and peace. Yuzen smiled and invited Daiso to walk with him the next morning. As they entered the forest path, Yuzen said, "I will teach you the secret of walking difficult paths. It is very simple. When you walk, walk. When you place your foot down, know that you are placing your foot down. When you shift your weight, be completely present with that shifting. This is all." "But I do that," Daiso protested. "I watch where I'm going. I pay attention to avoid roots and holes." "Do you?" Yuzen asked gently. "Or is your body walking while your mind is already at the destination, thinking about the meditation you'll do when you arrive? Tell me, what were you thinking about just before you twisted your ankle yesterday?" Daiso thought back. I was thinking about something someone said that bothered me, going over the conversation in my mind." "So your body was walking, but you were not present with the walking. Your attention was in a memory, and your foot found a route that you would have easily avoided if you had been here. This is why you struggle with this path. Not because the path is difficult, but because you are rarely fully present while walking it." As they continued, Yuzen demonstrated what he meant. His steps were slow, deliberate, completely attentive. He would pause before placing each foot, feeling the ground, adjusting his position if needed, moving with the path rather than fighting against it. His walking was a meditation, a practice of complete presence. Daiso tried to walk the same way. Immediately, he noticed how his mind wanted to rush ahead, to get the walk over with so he could arrive at his destination. But when he gently brought his attention back to the actual sensation of walking, to the feeling of each footfall, to the adjustment of balance required by uneven ground, something shifted. The path didn't become easier. The roots and holes were still there. But his relationship with the path transformed completely. When he was truly present with each step, he naturally found the places where his feet could land safely. His body's intelligence could guide him, but only when his mind was actually present to receive that guidance. By the time they reached the meditation hut, Daiso was amazed. "I didn't trip once," he said. "The walk felt completely different. The path was the same," Yuzen replied. "Your presence was different. And here is what I want you to understand. This teaching applies to everything in your life. Every difficulty you encounter is like this forest path. It is challenging, yes, but whether it is merely challenging or overwhelming depends entirely on whether you meet it with presence or with distraction. He continued, "When you are fully present with difficulty, you have access to all your resources, your intelligence, your intuition, your body's wisdom, your ability to adjust and respond. But when you are lost in thoughts about how difficult things are, or wishing they were different, or worrying about outcomes, you cut yourself off from these resources. You make yourself clumsy, both literally and figuratively." Over the following weeks, Daiso practiced bringing complete presence to the forest walk each day. Gradually, he became as sure-footed on the path as Yuzhen. But more importantly, he began to apply this principle to other areas of his life. When difficult emotions arose during meditation, instead of getting lost in stories about them, he would practice being completely present with the actual sensation. When conflicts arose with other monks, instead of replaying and rehearsing conversations in his mind, he would bring his full attention to the immediate interaction. He discovered that Yuzhen was right. Presence didn't make difficulties disappear, but it transformed his ability to work with them skillfully. Challenges that had seemed overwhelming became manageable when he met them with his full attention instead of with scattered, anxious thinking. One day, several months into this practice, Daiso was walking the forest path alone when he had a profound realization. He had been thinking of presence as a technique he applied to difficult situations, but in that moment, he understood it differently. Presence wasn't something he did. It was what he actually was, underneath all the mental commentary and distraction. His true nature was this aware presence, always here, always now. The only question was whether he recognized it and rested in it, or got lost in the constant stream of thoughts about past and future. The forest path, the difficult meditation, the challenging relationship, these were not obstacles to presence. They were opportunities to discover presence, invitations to return home to what he actually was beneath all the mental noise. When he shared this insight with Yuzhen, the old monk nodded with deep satisfaction. "Now you have found what the difficult path was always trying to teach you. Not how to walk carefully, though that is useful, but who you are when you are truly here. You have discovered that presence is not a practice you do. It is what you are when you stop doing so much thinking about experience and simply be with experience directly." The teaching of the difficult path illuminates how presence transforms our relationship with challenge. When we meet difficulty while lost in mental reactivity, we experience the difficulty plus all our thoughts about the difficulty. But when we meet difficulty with complete presence, we experience just the actual challenge, which is usually more workable than our thoughts about it suggested. This doesn't mean presence makes everything easy. The path through the forest remained root-crossed and uneven. But the monk who walked it with presence didn't add mental suffering to physical challenge. He didn't create stories about how unfair it was to have such a difficult path, or worry about twisting his ankle, or wish he were already at his destination. He simply walked, step by step, with attention. Notice in your own life how often you add mental suffering to natural challenge. Perhaps you're dealing with physical discomfort right now. The discomfort itself is one experience, but your thoughts about it, your wishes that it weren't there, your worry about whether it means something serious, your irritation at its presence, these create additional layers of suffering that presence could dissolve. The practice is to distinguish between actual difficulty and mental elaboration about difficulty. When you can rest in presence with just the actual experience, without the overlay of story and resistance, you often discover that what seemed unbearable becomes simply what is happening right now. And what is happening right now is almost always manageable. Even if what you imagine might happen in the future feels overwhelming, feel into this right now. What is actually difficult in this present moment? Not what you're worried might be difficult later, not what was difficult earlier, but what is actually challenging right now. Often, when you bring attention to the present moment, you discover that this moment itself is okay, even if the thoughts about past and future moments are distressing. Your body knows this wisdom. When you stub your toe, the pain is intense for a moment, then fades. Your body doesn't continue creating suffering about the stubbed toe beyond the actual sensation. But your mind will often replay the incident. Blame yourself or others. Worry about whether damage was done, creating suffering that continues long after the actual pain has faded. The body lives in presence. The mind lives in story. You can choose where to place your attention. In the final hours before dawn, when night's darkness begins to thin but morning has not yet arrived, there is a quality of stillness that exists nowhere else. In this between time, a meditation master named Soen would sit in complete silence, not practicing any technique, not trying to achieve any state, simply being present with the gradual transition from darkness to light. Students would sometimes ask him about this practice. "What are you doing during these early morning sits?" they would inquire. "What technique are you using?" Soen's answer was always the same. "I am not doing anything. I am simply being aware of being aware." This answer puzzled most students. How could you be aware of being aware? Wasn't awareness just what you had, not something you could notice? But Soen would patiently explain that most people live their entire lives aware of objects, thoughts, sensations, but never aware of awareness itself. They see thoughts but don't notice the consciousness that sees the thoughts. They hear sounds but don't recognize the awareness that hears. One morning, a student named Eiko arrived early and sat near Soen during his pre-dawn practice. She had been struggling with meditation for months, always feeling like she was failing because her mind continued to produce thoughts. She hoped that by sitting with the master, some of his peace might somehow transfer to her. As they sat in the darkness, Eiko tried once again to empty her mind of thoughts, but as usual, thoughts continued arising. Frustration built. After about 20 minutes, unable to contain herself, she whispered, "Master Soen, I cannot stop my thoughts. How do you achieve such perfect mental silence?" Soen was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked softly, "Who is it that notices your thoughts?" Eiko was confused. "I notice them, of course. And who is this I that notices? Can you find it? Where is it located?" Eiko turned her attention inward, looking for the self that was aware of thoughts. But the more she looked, the more elusive it became. She could find thoughts, but when she tried to find the thinker, there was only more thoughts about the thinker. She could find awareness of thoughts, but when she tried to locate that awareness, it seemed to be nowhere and everywhere at once. "You cannot find it because it is not an object," Soen explained gently. "It is the subject, the knowing itself. It has no location because it is not a thing. It is the space in which all things appear. This awareness that you are searching for is what you actually are. You are not the thoughts. You are not the body. You are not the emotions. You are the consciousness that is aware of all these things." "But if I am awareness," Eiko whispered, "why do I suffer so much?" "Because you identify with the content of awareness rather than recognizing yourself as awareness itself. You believe you are the worried thought, the sad feeling, the inadequate self-image. But these are just objects, appearing in awareness. They come and go. The awareness that sees them never changes, never suffers, never lacks anything." As Soen spoke, the first hint of dawn light began to appear at the horizon. He gestured toward the window, watched the darkness gradually become light. Where is the darkness going? Where is the light coming from? They are not things that move or travel. They are qualities appearing and disappearing in space. Your thoughts and emotions are like this. They appear and disappear in the space of awareness. But the space itself is never darkened by dark thoughts or brightened by happy thoughts. It remains unchanging, always clear, always present. Something in Eiko shifted as she heard these words and watched the dawn. For a moment, just a brief moment, She was not looking at her thoughts, but from the awareness that saw thoughts. She was not experiencing the dawn, but being the awareness in which the experience of dawn appeared. It was utterly simple, utterly obvious, and completely transformative. "This is it?" she asked in amazement. "This awareness that has been here all along?" "This is it," Soen confirmed. "You have been searching for something exotic and special, but what you are is the most ordinary, obvious thing there is. The problem is that it's so close, so fundamental, that you overlook it constantly. You are always trying to improve the contents of awareness rather than recognizing yourself as awareness itself." From that morning forward, Iko's practice transformed completely. She still had thoughts, emotions, and challenges, but she no longer identified with them as completely as before. She had discovered the space in which they all appeared, and that space was what she actually was. This recognition didn't solve all her problems, but it changed her relationship with problems fundamentally. They were weather passing through the sky of awareness, temporary and workable, rather than fundamental truths about who she was. This teaching about awareness itself is perhaps the most profound and subtle in all of Buddhist wisdom. It points to something that cannot be grasped intellectually, but can be recognized directly. That your essential nature is not any thought, emotion, or sensation, but the consciousness that is aware of all these things. When you rest as this awareness, rather than as the contents appearing in it, a fundamental peace becomes available. Not because your life circumstances improve, not because you achieve some special state, but because you recognize what you actually are beneath all the changing phenomena. You are the unchanging awareness in which everything changes. This recognition is always available. Right now, whatever you're experiencing, there is awareness of that experience. Thoughts come and go, but the awareness of thoughts remains constant. Sounds arise and fade, but the awareness that hears remains. Your body moves through sensations, but the consciousness that knows, sensation is untouched by what it knows. You might notice this most clearly in the gaps between thoughts. When one thought ends, and before the next thought begins, what is present? Not emptiness, but aware presence. This is what you are. Not the thoughts before or after, but the awareness that knows both thoughts and the space between them. As you rest here now, there is no need to make this recognition happen. It's already the case. Awareness is already present, already aware. The only question is whether you notice it, not as an object among other objects, but as the subject that is aware of all objects. The seeing that sees everything but cannot be seen. The knowing that knows everything but cannot be made into an object of knowledge. Let everything rest now in this simple recognition. You are not what appears in awareness. You are awareness itself. And awareness, being nothing in particular, can hold everything without being disturbed by anything. This is your true home, your actual nature, the peace that was never missing but only overlooked. The thoughts that say you should be different, should be more peaceful, should be asleep by now. These are just more content appearing in awareness. They are not you. They are not truth. They are temporary movements in the vast space of consciousness that you are. Rest as this awareness now, not trying to be it because you already are it, not trying to achieve it because it cannot be gained or lost. Simply recognizing what has been here all along, closer than your own breath, more intimate than your own thoughts, the very consciousness that is reading these words right now. This awareness doesn't come and go. It doesn't sleep and wake. It is always present, always here, always now. When your body sleeps, awareness continues, witnessing even dreams and deep sleep. You have never not been this awareness. You have only sometimes forgotten to recognize it. As the night deepens into its quietest hours, let this recognition settle into your being, not as an intellectual understanding, but as a direct knowing. You are the space in which all experience happens. You are the stillness in which all movement occurs. You are the silence in which all sound arises. You are the peace that needs nothing to change in order to be at peace. All the teachings we've explored tonight point to this one recognition. Acceptance is recognizing that whatever appears in awareness is allowed to be here. Presence is resting as awareness rather than being lost in thought. Compassion is seeing that all beings share this same awareness, this same fundamental nature. Letting go is releasing identification with the contents of awareness and resting as awareness itself. You don't need to remember everything from tonight's journey. These teachings are not information to be stored, but invitations to recognize what you already are. When you wake tomorrow, you will still be this awareness. When challenges arise, you will still be the consciousness that knows them. Nothing that happens in your life can change or damage what you essentially are. Let sleep come naturally now, not as something you achieve, but as something that happens within the awareness you are. Your body knows how to sleep. Your mind knows how to rest. Trust these natural processes, supported by the recognition that you are the awareness that witnesses both sleeping and waking without being limited to either state. The Buddha taught that all beings possess this Buddha nature, this awakened awareness, already complete and perfect. You have not been working tonight to gain something you lack. You have been discovering what has been true all along, hidden not by its absence but by its obviousness, overlooked not because it was far away but because it was too close to see. Rest now in this ultimate acceptance of yourself as you actually are, which is awareness itself, pure, spacious, and utterly at peace. Let this recognition be the ground on which you rest, the home to which you return, the truth that holds you through all the changes of life. In the vastness of awareness that you are, let the body rest, the mind quiet, the breath slow. Nothing needs to be different. Nothing needs to be achieved. You are already home. You have always been home. This recognition is the deepest peace, the truest rest, the final liberation. Sleep well, dear friend, and know that the awareness you are will watch over this sleeping body with the same gentle presence it brings to all of life. May you rest deeply in the peace that was never missing. May you wake tomorrow remembering what these teachings pointed toward, and may this recognition of your true nature as awareness itself become the foundation for all your days. Thank you for walking this path with us tonight at Sleepy Monk. The journey continues, not away from here, but deeper into the recognition of what you've always been. Rest now. Peace is your nature. You are home.